How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Beis, Daf 12, Masechta Chullin. Yud Beis is a great daf. We learn about when Shechita requires supervision. Okay, which kind of flows into the next topic, which is Shechita is mainly done by experts. So those two are kind of related. And honestly, the second topic of Shechita mainly being done by experts, that akol mitzuyin etzel Shechita mumchinen. I think something like that. What is it? Rov mitzuyin etzel Shechita mumchinen. Great, I had it underlined. That most people involved in Shechita are experts, right? I, for example, am not a Shechita expert. I'm not a shochet. Laat, I'm learning Hilchos Shechita. But I would not just go and slaughter an animal. Who's going to go and slaughter an animal? Probably somebody who knows what they're doing most of the time. So Rov mitzuyin etzel Shechita mumchin hein. So those two topics. So that concept, you could even say that like the topic or the big topic of this daf is the concept of Rov mitzuyin etzel Shechita mumchin hein. But there is more, so I have that as kind of one section here, and it relates to the first section as well of when Shechita requires supervision. Because if we say that most people involved in Shechita are experts and they know what they're doing, so in what scenarios is supervision necessary? Next, assuming that meat you've found is kosher. Okay, in what scenarios can you assume that when you find meat, it is kosher meat? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? Because again, it also relates to this concept. If we say that Rov mitzuyin etzel Shechita mumchinen, so what nafkaminas does that have on if you find meat? Can you assume that whoever slaughtered it was an expert? Well, that depends on where you find it. And finally, the Shechita of a cheresh, shoteh, katan. It seems that we're getting close. Like tomorrow, it looks like we're going to close in on the first Mishnah of Masechta Chullin and get up to the second Mishnah tomorrow. So we are, at the end of today's daf, we're going to start getting towards the final elements of the Mishnah that we began on Daf Beis of Masechta Chullin. Friends, I really can't wait to learn Daf Yud Beis of Masechta Chullin together. So without further ado, let's get at it. Friends, we begin on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph of Masechta Chullin, the fourth line of the daf. Rav Nachman Omar Rav. Rav Nachman says in the name of one of his Rebbeim, Rav. Ra echad sheshachat, if you see a fellow shechting, imra mitchila v'ad sof, mutar lecha mishchitasu. If you supervised the shechita, soup to nuts, from beginning to end, the whole thing, and you can confirm it was a valid shechita, so then it is permitted to consume his slaughter. And if you have not supervised entirely the shechita, so then you can't eat it. Now, what's the scenario? Well, if you know about the shochet that he is top notch, if you know he knows his stuff, he knows he's a mumche, he knows the halachis, he knows how to shech, kitzer, he's a reliable shochet, well then you don't need to supervise at all. Friends, when's the last time you supervised the shechita on the meat that you eat? Now, if the opposite is true, you know that this guy is an Amoritz, or at least with regard to Shechita, if you know that this guy does not know Hilchos Shechita, so again, Pshita, obviously, you're going to have to supervise him, right? We had seen, I think on Daf, we had learned on Daf, on Daf Gimel, we also learned on Daf Tes, right? That if a person doesn't know Hilchos Shechita, so he requires supervision. So it goes without saying that if we're talking about somebody who does not know Hilchos Shechita, of course you can only eat the meat if you've supervised the Shechita and can confirm it's A-okay. Ve'ela de lo yada. Well, maybe it's talking about a scenario where you don't know the guy. First time you ever saw him. You don't know. Looks like an Erel Chayid. Does he know Hilchos Shechita? Could be. I don't know. I never gave him a fire. Ve'ela de lo yada. Igamir lo gamir. I don't know. Maybe he knows his stuff. Maybe he doesn't. So lema rov mitzuin etzel shchita mumchinen. Well, if that's the case, that I don't know either way. Maybe he knows his stuff. Maybe he doesn't. I simply don't know. Well, in that case, let's rely upon rov mitzuin etzel shchita mumchinen. The fact that we assume that most people that are going to slaughter an animal know what they're doing. Right? As I mentioned before, I'm not just going to go up to an animal and slaughter. I wouldn't know where to get started. So, somebody who's going up to that animal with confidence, putting it on its back, tying up his legs, slitting its throat, slicing through everything that needs to be sliced through, you can assume this guy's done it once or twice and he's been trained. I asked my friend Yosef Goodman. He's my Shechita guy. Obviously, his name comes up a lot because we learn. He's my Tanya Chavrusa. We learn in the morning. So, and he also he procures his own sheep for his family. He's got 8 kids, family of 10 people, and they slaughter their own sheep. And anyways, so I asked him. They like have one person like hold it. Because, I watch YouTube videos now about sheep and things because we're learning about it. So I see that you could like take a sheep and just like put it on its back or something. So I wonder maybe one person kind of flips over on the back and the other one gives a slice. He said they tie it up. We'll see. I don't know. I think he said maybe they're going to do a Shechita soon. Maybe I should go. I need to spend a little more time with Hillel's book, I think, before I'm ready. But maybe I should just go and suck it up. Be a man. We'll see. Akoponim. Where were we? So, Rov Mitzuyin Eitzel Shechita Mumchinen. So, most people that are going to go ahead and shecht an animal know what they're doing. So again, we're trying to figure out what's the scenario where Rav Nachman had to say in the name of Rav that you gotta supervise the shechita. In what scenario is that necessary? If we know that he knows what he's doing, you don't have to supervise it. If you know that he doesn't know what he's doing, then of course you have to supervise. I don't need Rav to tell me that. If you don't know if he knows what he's doing, well, you can assume that he does, because Rav Mitzuyin Etzel Shechita Mumchinen. No. Milotani, after all, did we not learn in a Braise, Hare Shemotza Tarnegeles Shchuta Bashuk? If a person found a slaughtered bird in the market, or if he says to his messenger, say shchot, please go out and slaughter for me, right? He made a messenger, he says, look, I'm going out for a little bit, go out to the back, slaughter my sheep. He comes home and it's slaughtered. You can assume that it's slaughtered kosherly. Interestingly, the Rambam, if you look up that Rambam there, Perek Dalet Halacha Zayin of Hilchos Shechita, he talks about a scenario where, you see, because if you look at the Reish over here, right, Aresha Motzu Tanagol Shchuta Bashuk, what does that even mean? What if I just walk into Shuk Machne Yudin and I find a random chicken? I can assume that it's slaughtered. I think we're going to see later on. This comes up also. I think context is kind of important here. So the Rambam writes about a scenario where you see somebody shechting. Now you're not like observing him. Maybe you're far away, right? Maybe you walk into Shuk Machne Yehuda, and as you're approaching the chicken store or whatever, you see some guy, looks like a Jew, and he's holding a chicken. The next thing you know, the chicken is slaughtered, and now he leaves. You don't know who the guy is, but you saw he's a Jew, and he slaughtered a chicken. So you can assume that he knew what he was doing. Now, if you just randomly find a chicken lying on the floor in Shuk Machne Yehuda, I don't know about that. I think that we're going to see later as well, right? If you find a chicken, like a chicken thrown into the garbage dump outside Shuk Machne Yehuda, you can't assume that it was shechted properly, because otherwise, why aren't they selling? So, anyways, we're talking about a scenario. So again, Tanagol b'shuk, shchuta b'shuk. You see a slaughtered chicken in the market. You didn't necessarily observe the shechita, but you have the bird. But there is a slaughtered bird. Maybe it's being sold by one of the local places. Maybe like the Rambam was describing, you saw somebody slaughter and then leave, and now it's for sale. Or he said to your messenger, say shchot, go and shecht for me. And he comes back, he didn't observe the shechita, but he comes back and his command was his wish was effectively a command. And he has meat now. We can assume that it has been slaughtered properly. Alma Amrinan Rov Mitsuin Etzel Shechita Mumchinen. How come that is? Because we'll say that most people involved in Shechita are experts, and whoever was doing the Shechita in these scenarios knew what he was doing. So let's say the same thing in our scenario, that you have this guy, you don't know if he knows Hilchos Shechita or not, but he's slaughtering an animal. You didn't see the whole thing, but you see that, he was, whatever you did see, he was definitely the Shechit. So you can assume that that it's kosher. So what's the scenario where Rab had to tell us that you have to supervise the whole thing? The Olam Diyada de Logamir, it's talking about a scenario where you know that the guy doesn't know the halachas. Okay, so if that's the case, you have to observe it, right? And it's talking about a scenario where we saw him slaughter one of the two pipes, and we're talking about an animal where you have to slaughter both pipes. So Shapir, he did a good job on one of the pipes. From the fact that we saw that he did a good job on one of the pipes, maybe we don't need to observe the second pipe. Maybe one pipe was enough for us. Got a little squeamish. Kamash Malad, Hai Isramuye Isramile. So rather, since we know that this person does not know Hilchos Shechita, observing the slicing of just one of the pipes is insufficient, because we could say, yeah, sure, maybe he did a good job on that pipe, but it could also have been a fluke. Or, right, okay, it happens to be that he sliced it properly, but because we know that he doesn't know Hilchos Shechita, Idach Shemasha Shemadaras, but the other pipe, maybe he paused, maybe he pressed down, right? So therefore, what we're saying is that when it comes to somebody who we know does not know Hilchos Shechita, so you're going to have to observe the entire thing. Rav Dimi bar Yosef Rav Nachman. Rav Dimi bar Yosef asks Rav Nachman, somebody says to his messenger, say ushchot, go and shecht for me. Right? So Reuven says to Shimon, can you go and shecht a sheep for me? And he comes home, and there is a shechted sheep. Mau amalo chezkaso shachut. So Rav Nachman says you can assume that it has been slaughtered by the shaliach that you had appointed. However, the shluchot say usrom. However, if a person who says, right, Reuben says to Shimon, can you go and separate Trumas and Maasros for me? And Reuben goes out and he comes back and he says, oh, great, everything has been tied. What's the halacha there? Rav Nachman says to Rav Dimi bar Yosef, Ein chezkaso tarum. In that case, we can't assume that it was properly tied. I don't understand. I don't understand. If we have a chazaka, that a messenger does what he's messaged to do, so if we say, look, when Reuben says to Shimon, slaughter my sheep for me, and Reuben comes home and the sheep is slaughtered, and we say that it's kosher, and if we're going to say that that's because we assume that messengers do what they are messengered to do. Shimon was messengered to slaughter a sheep. Reuven comes home, it's slaughtered. Who slaughtered it? Shimon. He did what he was asked to do. Then we should say the Zalbazach, we should say the same thing by Trume. That when Reuven says to Shimon, can you please tithe my produce for me? And Reuven comes home and his produce has been tied, well, let's say the same thing. Shliach osa shlichuso. Shimon did what he was asked to do, and he tied it for him. So that should be acceptable. We said it's not acceptable by Truma. V'ein chazaka shliach osa shlichuso. And if we're saying that by Truma, we cannot assume that Shimon tied the grain, the produce, because ein shliach osa shlichuso, because we assume that a messenger does not necessarily do what he was asked to do. And when Reuben asked Shimon to tie his produce for him, we can't assume that Shimon simply did it. Well, then afilu shechita namilo. Well, then we should say that shechita is also not trustworthy. When Reuben says to Shimon, Shimon, can you slaughter my sheep for me? And then Reuben comes home later and it's slaughtered. Well, if we say that we can't assume that a messenger does what he was asked to do, then we don't know that it's Shimon who slaughtered this sheep. So Amalei Rav Nachman says, L'chi teichol ala kora de milcha. I'll tell you when you measure out for me a measure of salt. If you give me the right amount of salt, I'll tell you. Okay. All right. Lo'olam ein chazaka shliach osa shlichuso. Look, at the end of the day, we don't assume shliach osa shlichuso. The Rambam Taka says when it comes to isura, when it comes to whether something is osur or mutter, like trumas and maisus. So in general, we don't say shliach osa shlichuso. We don't assume that because Reuven asked Shimon to tithe his produce for him, that Shimon in fact tied the produce for him. And at the same time, we also would not assume that because Reuven asked Shimon to slaughter his sheep for him, Shimon's the one who slaughtered the sheep either. Okay, fine. Here's the difference though. That Shechita inami inish achrina, skip the word dilma, inami inish achrina shama v'azul shochat. The thing is, what's the worst case scenario when it comes to Shechita? Reuven asked Shimon, can you please slaughter my sheep for me? Worst case scenario, Shimon didn't do it. But Levi, right, but Reuven's coming home and the animal's slaughtered. So what happened? Well, even if we say it wasn't Shimon, Levi overheard, and Levi went ahead and did it. At the end of the day, Rov Matun Eitzel Shechita Mumchin. As we've been saying, most people involved in Shechita are mumchas, experts. If you came home and the animal was slaughtered, you can assume that even if it wasn't Shimon, fine, so Levi did it, Levi knows what he's doing. Whoever did it knows what he's doing. Truma, now if the same thing happened by Truma, however, Reuven says to Shimon, can you tithe my produce for me? Levi overhears it and Levi goes out and do it, it won't work. Because that would be an example of Torim Shalom Midas. That would be an example of somebody separating Truma without the knowledge of the owner of the produce. If Reuben asked Shimon to tithe his produce, right? Reuben asked Shimon to tithe Reuven's produce for him. So Reuven knows that Shimon's going to be tithing, or is expecting that Shimon's going to be tithing the produce. He's not expecting Levi to tithe this produce for him. And the halacha is that Levi would not be allowed to, at least by default, would not be allowed to tithe Reuven's produce for him without Reuven's knowledge. So that is the difference. So even if we assume ein shliach osa shlichuso, that a shliach does not do his shlichus, nonetheless, when it comes to Shechita, you could still rely upon it. Right, that Reuven has a sheep. He says, hey, can you shech my sheep for me? He comes home and it's been shechted. Whoever did the Shechita in that scenario is somebody that can be trusted. So now we are going to discuss kind of some of the limitations around assuming that the meat that you found is kosher. Says the Gemara, let's say that this concept of most people involved in Shechita are expert. Let's say it's actually a machlokes. Okay, let's see. The sani that we learn in a braise, harei she'avdu lo g'day v'sanegelav. A person loses his goats and his chickens. Anybody have a cheshek to raise goats and chickens now that we're learning Masechta Chullin? I feel like that wasn't so much of the vibe in Masechta Zvachim and Menachos, but Chullin, it's more personal. It's more personal, you know? All of a sudden it's wait, Shechita sounds interesting. You know? I don't know. Maybe we should raise goats. I think in Nachlaot, in Yerushalayim where I live, they probably used to raise goats here. I again, my friend Yosef Goodman, I think, I had to confirm with him that in his house, I think they have like a chaser downstairs. I think that they may have raised like sheep and stuff in there. I have to confirm with him. But why not? I mean, this is an old neighborhood. It's like 150 years old. Who knows what they did 150 years ago? Akoponim. Where are we? Maybe Reb Hillel, you have a shtickle chaser. Maybe the chaser, maybe they used to raise goats in your chaser? Would you consider, Reb Hillel, getting goats again in there? What about chickens? Akoponim. Where are we? Rov mitzuyin eitzel shchita mumchenein. Tanoi, let's say it's taka machleges tanem desanya risha avdulu gidoyev v'tarnegelav. A person loses his goats and his chickens. V'halach umitzon shchutim. Okay, he lost his goats, he lost his chickens. He's searching around for them. He finds that they've already been slaughtered. Okay, so this is a little bit less controlled than the scenarios that we had earlier. The scenarios that we had earlier were pretty controlled. Reuben says to Shimon, I got a sheep in the back. Can you go slaughter for him? Reuben comes home. His sheep has already been slaughtered, as he requested. The shaila was it Shimon, was it Levi? But it's not super random. But here, he lost his sheep, he lost his goats, he lost his chickens, and he finds that mysteriously they've been slaughtered. Rabbi Yehuda says osir. Rabbi Chanina b'no Rabbi Yosef Aglili matir. Rabbi Chanina b'no Rabbi Yosef Aglili says mutter. Amar Rebbe says Rebbe Nirin divrei Rabbi Yehuda shemitzon ba'ashba. Says Rebbe that I choose to side with Rabbi Yehuda to say osir if the slaughtered goats and chickens were found in the garbage dump. So we have to assume that these carcasses were strewn in the garbage dump because they're nevela. And I side with Reb Chanina in this machlokes if we're talking about the carcasses were found in a house. Okay, you were searching, and in one of the neighbors, you saw that there were your goats and chicken, and they have been slaughtered already. So when they are found in a house, Rebbe says, I'm going to side with Reb Chanina there and say that they are kosher, that they're mutter, and when found in the garbage dump, I'm going to side with Reb Yehuda and say that they are asur. Let's say that the machlokes between Reb Yehuda and Reb Chanina is the Marsavar Amrinan Raiv Mitzuyin Eitzel Shechita Mumchinen, that Reb Chanina says most people involved in Shechita know what they are doing and are experts and can be trusted, and therefore Reb Chanina says mutter. Umarsavar Lo Amrinan Raiv Mitzuyin Eitzel Shechita Mumchinen, and we'll say that Reb Yehuda holds that we don't say Rov Mitzuyin Eitzel Shechita Mumchinen, and therefore Osir. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak loy. He says no, that's not what's going on here. Everyone agrees with the principle that we have been discussing. Rov Mitzuyin Eitzel Shechita Mumchinen. That is an accepted principle. The difference is ubebayis dechule alma loy plige deshari. Now, if the goats and the chickens were found in a house, there is no machlokes. There is only agreement that it is kosher. And if the carcasses were found, if the goat and chicken carcasses were found in the garbage heap at the market, there is no machlokes. Everyone will agree, osir. Ki plige, where they argue, where there is a machlokes, is be'ashpa shebaboyis. When you have a moija, as my grandfather would say, that when you have, it's in a garbage heap, but that garbage heap is in a home. So is it considered like a home and it's mutter, or is it considered like a garbage heap and it's also? Rabbi Yehuda holds that a person is likely to throw nevela into the garbage heap in his home, and therefore it's also because it might be nevela. And Rabbi Chanina holds that a person would not throw nevela into the trash heap in his house because it's going to start rotting and smelling horrible. So therefore one would not do that, and therefore if you found it even in the trash heap but it's in a house, Rabbi Chanina would say that we're talking about kosher Shechita. It's not nevela. Okay, but everyone, however, does agree with the principle that rov mitzun eitzel Shechita mumchin hein. Amar Mar, we said earlier, Amar Rebbe, that Rebbe says nirin divrei Rabbi Yehuda shemitzayin ba'ashpa. We had said a few minutes ago that Rebbe's opinion is that Rebbe says I side with Rabbi Yehuda that it's aser when the goats and chickens are found slaughtered and their carcasses are found in a trash heap. I side with Rabbi Yehuda that it's aser. My ashpa, what trash heap are we talking about? Ilema ashpa shebashuk. If we're talking about the trash heap in the market. Now, Chevra, if you come, Reb Jonathan Shapiro is here in Eretz Yisrael. I know that he was at the shuk the other day. If you go to the garbage dump outside Shuk Machne Yehuda, you will find animal parts there. That is for sure. At least something. I've definitely seen it before. That's for sure. Also, you walk through the shuk, they have those like big carts where they like, tow away the trash. There for sure you have animal parts. Fish, cows, all sorts of stuff. Akoponim. So if you find, anything obviously that was sellable would be in the market. It would be in the market. Would be in the stores being sold. So anything that you're going to find in the in the dumpster outside of Shuk Machne Yehuda is it's not. You're not going to want to eat that. So my ashba, what trash heap are we talking about? Ilema ashba shebashuk ha'amar tuchule amalei plige de aser. Well, if we said that we're talking about the trash heap in the market, well, we had also said that there's no machlokas there. Everyone simply agrees that that's aser. So no need to side with Rabbi Yehuda there to say aser. There's no siding. There's no machlokas b'chlal. Everyone agrees that it's aser. So rather, it must be that Rebbe is saying that he sides with Rabbi Yehuda in the machlokes when it comes to a trash heap in the house. Rabbi Yehuda says aser. Rabbi Chanina says mutter. And Rebbe is saying I side with Rabbi Yehuda that it's also when it comes to a trash heap in a house. Aim a seifa, but what about the seifa? And Rebbe says that he sides with Rabbi Chanina if we're talking about the carcasses were in a trash heap in the house. I'm sorry. If he sides with Rabbi Yehuda, he sides with Rabbi Chanina that it's mutter if the carcasses are found in a house. But my bias, what are we talking about in a house? Ilema bias mamish, if it literally means in a house, but we said there's no machlokes there. Everyone agrees if the carcasses are found in a house, it was slaughtered properly. I think Tosfos, what does Tosfos say? Rashi says, so Tosfos says in Aresha Abdullah Gedayib, who adin nignivu demishum dechasher agneva lo chasher anevela. Interesting, right? So meaning, if you're wondering, if you find your goats and your chickens slaughtered on somebody's kitchen table, so why? And we're saying everyone agrees that it's kosher, but didn't he steal it? Why are you trusting the thief? So Tosfos says two separate things. Just because he's a thief doesn't necessarily mean he's going to eat nevela. Okay, anyways, so when it comes to finding the carcasses in somebody's house, we said there's no machlekes there. Everyone agrees it's mutter. Well, if that's the case, then it must mean that what Rebbe is saying is I side with Rabbi Chanina in a garbage heap in a house. But one second, didn't we just say that he sides with Rabbi Yehuda with regard to a garbage heap in a house? Kasha Rebbe ad Rebbe. Rebbe seems to be contradicting himself. This is what Rebbe is saying. Near in Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, not to me, I'm not siding with Rabbi Yehuda. Rather, Reb Chanina b'no Rabbi Yosef Glili. Reb Chanina himself agrees with, he concedes to Rabbi Yehuda be'ashba shebashuk when we're talking about a garbage heap in the market, and there he concedes and he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that it's asur, and they agree there's no machlokas there. Shaf Reb Chanina b'no Rabbi Yosef Glili lo nechlak olav ela b'ashba shebabais, because Reb Chanina is only arguing with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to a trash heap in a house. That's where he argues. But if we're talking about a trash heap in the market, of course it's asur. Venir and v'chulei, and the inverse is true as well. Rabbi Yehuda would agree with Reb Chanina when it comes to finding it in a house, that it's mutter. They only disagree by the trash heap in the house. So the machlekes is by the trash heap in the house, but what Rebbe is saying is that if we're talking about a trash heap in the market, Reb Chanina would admit to Rabbi Yehuda that it is asur. And if we're talking about literally just finding it on somebody's kitchen table, Rabbi Yehuda would agree with Reb Chanina that it is mutter. Okay, gevaldik. So what have we just said? So I think what we said is that basically there are limitations to Rov Mitzvah Eitzel Shechita Mumchinen, right? Because we said, for example, if you find this meat in a trash heap, so then if you find meat in a trash heap, then you can't assume that it is necessarily properly slaughtered. And what does Tosfos say? The bottom Tosfos on Yud Beis Aleph, he says, "Hu adin de plige b'shuk below ashba." Right. What if you find meat in the market but not in the garbage dump? Right. Meaning, well, what have we said? We said if you find it in the garbage dump of the market, everyone says it's nevel. If you find it in a house, on the kitchen table, everyone says that it's kosher. If you find it in the trash heap of a house, we say it's machlekes. Also, says Tosfos, if you would find it in the market but not in a trash heap, just I guess lying in the market, it's also machlekes. And the Rambam taka passes there that case would be asur, right? If you find meat in the market, not in the trash heap, the Rambam passes like Rabbi Yehuda that it would be asur, which is interesting, right? So we're seeing like some limitations. Now, what's the difference? For example, so the Rambam talks about a scenario where you saw a Jew, right? I mentioned earlier, right? You're going to the market and you're getting close to the butcher and you see that there's a Jew there slaughtering a sheep. Not a sheep would be a big deal, but slaughtering a chicken, and then he leaves. And by the time you get there, you don't know who it was who slaughtered. But we say, look, you saw that a Jew slaughtered it. It's being sold now at one of the stores. You can assume that whoever slaughtered it was an expert. But if you simply just find a random chicken in the market and you don't know what it is, can you eat it? Can you take it and eat it? I don't know. That's already less kind of controlled. Maybe there's more variable. I don't know. Sounds like Rabbi Yehuda would say no. So anyways, so it sounds like if you kind of know that it was slaughtered by some Jew, like it sounds like if you have like some kind of like some basic knowledge that it was slaughtered by a Jew who slaughtered an animal, you can assume that person knew what he was doing. It sounds like if you like don't know anything about it, like you just find a chicken in the market and you don't have any information there, I don't know that you can necessarily just assume that it's kosher. I don't know, maybe Rabbi Chanina would say you can. I don't know. But so I do think that there are some limitations to Rov Mitzvah Eitzel Shechita Mumchinen. Maybe it has to be Rov Mitzvah. You have to see the guy. You have to know basically what it is. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think? So Tosfos quotes a Gemara in Babble Metzia that comes up. Also, the Kesef Mishnah, the Rambam quoted it, that Reb Chanina, different Reb Chanina, found a piece of meat in an area that most people are Jewish, and they quote this machlekes over there about if you can actually eat that meat. So, anyways, yeah. So, I mean, if we're going to pass on like Rabbi Yehuda, so then it would be no, because you wouldn't just be able to assume that it's kosher. But anyways, Cheva, what do you think? And friends, now we get to the final section of today's daf. Shechita of a cheresh, shoteh, or a katan Says the Gemara, so chutz micheresh shoteh v'kohen shem yikalkelu es shchitas. The Mishnah had said that cheresh, a deaf and mute person, also I think assumed to be dumb, and a shoteh, a foolish person, and a katan, a minor, do not slaughter shem yikalkelu es shchitasin, lest they mess up they ruin their shechita. Shema kilkalu lo katani, el shema yikalkalu. So it doesn't say that if you have the shechita of a cheresh shoteh v'katan, you can't eat it because maybe they messed up in the shechita. No, it doesn't say. It says shema yikalkalu. Maybe they will. Meaning it's saying you can't even lichatchila allow them to do shechita even when supervised. Shema yikalkalu. So not just if we find a meat that they slaughtered, we say, okay, can't do it because we have to be concerned that they didn't do a proper shechita. It means they even won't in the future do a proper shechita. Don't even allow a cheresh shoteh v'katan to do shechita even when supervised lichatchila, because we're concerned about shema yikalklu. Maybe they'll mess up the shechita. Amarava, so Someres, ein mosrin loim chulin lichatchila. We don't give to them chulin. We don't give to them even just regular animals to slaughter even when supervised. Lichatchila, we wouldn't do it. Now, bidi eved, continues the Mishnah. That bidi eved, however, in these scenarios in the Mishnah, right, going back to really the very beginning of the Masechta, in all these cases in the Mishnah, so including cheresh shoteh v'katan, if they were being supervised, so then you can eat their. So then Shechita is Kosher, then there's Shechita is Kosher. Now, if you remember from the first two daf of the Masechta, we were saying, wait, the Bechulan, Sheshachtu v'acher also Shechita is Kosher can't be talking about cheresh shoteh v'katan, since it was talking about that right before this statement. So then she just said, Ve'im acher osam, right? It doesn't say Bechulam, but that was just saying that it can't be limited only to cheresh shoteh v'katan, but it could be referenced to also cheresh, right? It says v'chulan, all of the scenarios including cheresh shoteh v'katan. So if they are, however, being observed, shechita is kosher, then the shechita is b'diavad kosher. Even though we just said shema yikalkelu lichatchila, they shouldn't, even if they're being observed. But b'diavad, it's kosher. Mantana deloy ba'inan kavana l'shechita. Whose opinion is it? Which Tana says that you don't need kavana when it comes to shechita, because we can't assume that the cheresh shoteh v'katan is going to be slaughtering with proper kavana. And we say, so long as it's supervised, it is kosher b'diavad. So Rava says, Rava Reb Nosani. Azoy zopt Reb Nosan. This is the opinion of Reb Nosan. Detani Oshaya Zira Demin Chevraya. The younger Oshaya from the Chevra. So it's like a machlek, as Rashi says, Demin Chevraya from the Chevra. Tosfos says Chevraya is the name of a place, but I prefer Rashi's pshat. From the Chevra. Rabbi Shai Zeira Demin Chavraya. He's one of the Chevra. In the base, one of the Chevra in the Bnei Yeshiva, one of the Yeshiva students. Zarek Sakin Linoyat Sabakoiso. A person was playing darts with a knife. Took a Shechita knife and threw it towards the wall, so that it would get stuck in the wall. And along the way, it sliced through the neck of a chicken. Reb Nosson says, so long as it's sliced properly through the chicken neck, as long as you check the shechita and the knife is good, shechita is good, everything that needs to be sliced has been sliced, kosher shechita. Even though there was no kavana. His kavana was to hit a bullseye on the target on the wall. It just happened to be that it sliced through the neck of a chicken. Chacham say apostle. Hutani lavu Amar, and then Reb Oshaya Zeira Demin Chevraya says about it, halacha Reb Nosson, that the halacha is like Reb Nosson. But 1 second, we're going to learn in a Mishnah later on that you need to have you need to slice back and forth, not just one directional. Sha'olcha uva kedarka. Well, yeah, it's talking about if a person threw the knife, went through the neck of the chicken, bounced off the wall, and on its way back, got the other direction too. Okay. Alternatively, by the way, it could be talking about kind of a longer knife. We're going to get to that, I think, in the second parak. Chevraya that was Daf Yud Beis of Masechta Chullin. Chevraya, what did you think about the 12th page of Masechta Chullin? Pretty cool. I thought it was a great daf, right? What do you think? How's Chullin going in general? I think after Zvachim and Menachos, basically anything that isn't impossible would just be amazing. And so far, I think this has been amazing. Anyways, when Shechita requires supervision, so when you know the shochet is not knowledgeable, right? We said if you know the shochet is knowledgeable, of course it does not require supervision. If you're not even sure, we say Rov Mitzuyin Eitzel Shechita Mumchinen. So that's also fine. It's when you know that the shochet is not knowledgeable, right? The shochet is not knowledgeable. So then he requires supervision the whole time. Even if he sliced through one pipe properly, you got to watch him slice through the second one as well. Sorry if you are squeamish, whatever. Shechita is mainly done by experts. That was a principle that kind of guided us through this daf. Very important principle. Rov Mitzuyin Eitzel Shechita Mumchinen. It allows us to make assumptions about the shochet and about his shechita. Assuming that meat you've found is kosher. Yes, when found in a house, it's kosher. No, when found in a public trash heap, it's not kosher. When found in a house trash, Rabbi Yehuda says, Asur. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, Mutter. Tosfos points out that the same machlokes would also be if you find it in the shuk, not in the shuk trash, but just in the shuk, there would be this machlokes as well. And finally, Shechita of a cheresh, shoteh, and katan, kosher b'di'eved when supervised. Friends, that was Daf Yud Beis of Masechta Chullin. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great, great, great day.